As we continue to get our houses in order, we all must continue to grow in the knowledge of Yah and continue to seek out His will for our life. It is important for us to grow in understanding of Him and learn to not lean on our own understandings that may come from different influences that are not based upon the foundation that the scriptures have laid. If we really want to understand Yahuwah, we have to read the scriptures. We have to make His word our foundation. And you know what? A statement like that normally cannot get much pushback in the Christian church. I've not come across one Christian that would ever argue with me about the importance of reading the scriptures and making the word our foundation. I've never met one. I don't think there is a preacher in any of these Protestant Christian churches that would be so bold to go against that statement. But here's the irony and the hypocrisy. Though I couldn't find one pastor to go against that statement, it is even harder to find pastors and church organizations that make that activity the foundation of their ministry. Now, that statement may throw some people off, so let me be clear that when I say this, I am speaking about reading the whole Bible, and making the whole Bible our foundation, not just the New Testament. I know I could find plenty of churches that promote the reading of the New Testament, but the Bible is not just the New Testament. It is a compilation of books that contains what people refer to as the Old Testament and the New Testament. I have stated in other videos that I do not like the label of Old and New Testament. For me personally, after reading the whole Bible, based on what I have read, I would label it as maybe the first covenant and then the renewed covenant. But more than likely, I wouldn't even split it up that way at all. You can divvy up and organize the scriptures in a better way than just by the covenants. The Sefer does a good job with that. This is how they divide it. More on the Sefer later though. The point I am making is that the entire Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, all books in between, and that includes the Apocrypha, all these books are important to read, study, and gather understanding from. You cannot read the New Testament first and believe you have understanding. The complete Bible must be read, and you must understand that there is actually a culture within the organized church today that does not believe this. They don't even hide this. A few weeks back, I stumbled upon this man who carries the title of a pastor. This pastor, he was speaking to a Rev 29 Jewish rabbi on the topic of Black Hebrew Israelites after that whole Kyrie Irving thing and when IUIC marched on the Barclays Center. This guy talking vexed me. He's a sellout, and listening to his completely inaccurate explanations were frustrating and provoking. But I got through it, and towards the end of the video, he made this statement in regards to what he feels the problem is with the Hebrew Israelites. And after you listen to this man named Pastor Dumasani Washington, I want you to then think about the arrogance a man like this can have and understand that this is what the majority of the Christian church follows. They just don't admit it so confidently as this man is about to do. Listen to what he says.
The message.
Yes, right. And we as men of the cloth, right, we always want to make it relevant, right? And we always, Rabbi, we have to kind of balance making it relevant to at the same time being true to the text, right? Yeah. Being true to the actual, what my Jewish friends call the Peshat, right? What was the actual meaning here? How do we actually do this? That way we still at least stay true to what we believe, right? And so what you're doing now, for example, so for these young Black men who are on social media, which has like been the main fuel of this, or you're walking down the street and you see these guys dressed in what I call bad holiday costumes. I mean, they have their things on, they're preaching. But here's the problem, Rabbi. They're reading Joel, Zephaniah, Zechariah, Habakkuk. They're reading prophets that by and large in the Christian church today, those books don't even exist, right? We pastors, we read Malachi to tell people to pay their tithes. Other than that, we don't have any use for Malachi, right? And this is what's going on. So they're reading these scriptures. First of all, he's reading something I didn't even know was in my Bible, right? Secondly, now he's misinterpreting it, but he already has his foot in the door because he showed me where it says, and he's showing me things like Egypt and Ethiopia. Isaiah chapter 11, verse 12, he said from the four corners of the earth, and he's naming these African and Middle Eastern lands. It's right there in the scriptures, right? I'm going, wow, I'd never even seen this before, right? So now I'm bringing this back to a pastor who may or may not know these things. If he can't give me a legit answer, that's another reason why I'm going over to here to this thing.
Yeah, you heard him correct. He said these books don't exist in the Christian church.
Yeah. Habakkuk. They're reading prophets that by and large in the Christian church today, those books don't even exist, right?
He said besides using Malachi to tell people to pay their tithes, they don't even have a use for Malachi.
We pastors, we read Malachi to tell people to pay their tithes. Other than that, we don't have any use for Malachi, right?
And you know that's true. He said the Israelites are reading stuff that he didn't even know was in his Bible.
And this is what's going on. So they're reading these scriptures. First of all, he's reading something I didn't even know was in my Bible. Right?
And then the next statement, he says that the Israelites are misinterpreting it.
Right? Secondly, now he's misinterpreting it. But
think of this arrogance. And this is exactly what we face as a majority in modern day Christianity. In one breath, the man can say he didn't even know the Bible said certain things, but that in the next breath, he says it's being misinterpreted. How can people make a claim like that when they know they haven't diligently studied the scriptures? It's mainly because what they want to view Yahuwah as, this is what they base the scriptures on. It's based upon their feelings and not about what the actual Bible says. The Bible is a complete book that a majority of Christian churches are not reading. But yet these people are taking the role and title as pastors, leading flocks, even though they are not reading this complete book. But yet they are out here teaching about it and making themselves men of authority in regards to the scriptures. They are teaching about a book that they have partially read, and they have developed and encouraged a culture of arrogance and pride, of feeling like you can understand Yah and his will without actually reading and studying to show yourself approved. All these books in the scriptures are important. And if you want a better relationship with the Most High, you have to read the scriptures. So what we must do is be the better example and show people a better way, the right way. I don't want to be one to keep saying, read your Bible, without helping you understand how to. The most important activity you can do right now is the reading of the scriptures and applying it to your life and your worldview, making his ways and his will the foundation of your life. And again, the only way you can do this is by reading the scriptures. So I want to help you with this. We are going to discuss how to read the Bible and what exactly is in it. Let's begin. Okay, so let's first talk about which Bible to read. For me personally, I read Bibles that do not practice the ineffable name doctrine. That's the doctrine that says our Father's name is too holy to be uttered, so they replace it with titles. I personally read the Sefer and the Hallelujah scriptures. You can find a link to both in the description box. They have restored the name of our Father and do not subscribe to the ineffable name doctrine, as well as the Hellenization of names and places of the Hebrews. There is no reason to change who these people are. We should not be adapting them to our American culture. We say these names Matthew, Peter, Judah, Israel. These are all changes of culture, making them more English than Hebrew. And over time, this practice has brought about confusion by the majority, who now want to take the Bible as an American or an English faith, more than it actually being a faith of the Hebrews that the world is coming into and accepting. So I use these Bibles. I love the Sefer because it includes the Apocrypha, so you can read all the books. So your next question may be, what about the King James or New King James Bibles? Again, I do not like the practice of the ineffable name doctrine, and this is what those Bibles subscribe to. But if these Bibles are all you have right now, absolutely, you should read them. Yah can, and he will speak to you through them. These are the same Bibles I started with on my journey. Be clear that just because the Sefer is my preference does not mean that it's the rule. I am not an authority. I am just telling you what works for me and how I lead my family. For me personally, the more you read his name, the more you use his name. And being that not taking his name in vain is a commandment he gave, I want to make sure that I use his name continuously. Now, there are Bibles that I am against, and that's the New International Version and the New Living Translation, and any other Bible like them that has removed verses out and placed footnotes in its place. Those are dangerous Bibles because they have removed some of the word. Those Bibles I do not recommend. So I hope that answers the question about the Bibles I use. Second thing to discuss is how I read the Bible. First thing to do is have a routine, especially if you're just starting out. Just don't do it random. Pick a time that works for you, and it preferably should be either as the first thing you do in the morning when you wake up or the last thing you do before you end your day. Getting in the habit of reading His Word daily is best done when you create actual habits to do so. So if you make it that after you open your eyes and brush your teeth, you go and read, and then you pray, after a few weeks of doing this consistently, it will become a habit, and you will see yourself really fly right through the scriptures. I recommend at least, at minimum, 1 chapter per day. I do encourage you to do more though, especially now when knowing and understanding Him is so important and our time is running out. But either way, get in the habit of reading daily, 1 chapter at minimum per day. Okay, so next question is, where do you start? Start at the beginning. Start at the book of Genesis. This is very important in regards to reading the scriptures. Most people today read the scriptures from a Christian perspective, which is exactly why they only read the scriptures that speaks directly about Messiah, who they call Christ. Do not read the Bible from a Christian perspective, or an American perspective, or a Roman perspective. You have to read the Bible in the proper perspective that the scriptures are written in. The Bible is a compilation of books written by the Hebrews, the only nation of people who are in a direct covenant with the Most High, Yahuwah. When we are reading the Bible, we are reading it from their perspective. We can't read it from anyone else. Throughout their history, these scriptures are what they learned from and raised their children under. As you move throughout the different books of the Bible, please know that these scriptures are what they read as a whole. And right now, I'm speaking of the first 5 books of the scriptures, which is the Torah. Then as their history developed, they had different prophets who spoke to them based on what Yah communicated to them. Then we have the writings of the Renewed Covenant and some of the epistles. These are all documents written by Hebrews. The one book that we know was not written by a Hebrew was Luke, but Luke was amongst the Hebrews. The point I am getting at is that this is a Hebrew book that has been translated in different languages so that those who love our Creator can understand how to come to Him. You must read the scriptures as it has been intended to be read. The minute that you decide to bring your cultural influence in and your own culture into the scriptures, you are now tainting the scriptures. Like as an example, people say that they celebrate Jesus' birthday on December 25th. And even though they hear it's pagan, they say, I don't care about that because I'm celebrating his birthday and how can that be wrong? But the question is, whose culture is that? What scripture do you even hear the celebrating of birthdays from? That is not something that the culture of the Hebrews speaks on. So when you have added that you're celebrating his birthday, you are bringing in another culture and then tying it to the Hebrews. And then you're justifying yourself based on this. And this attitude and behavior is done more often than it's not. You have to read the scriptures based on understanding who the scriptures were written by and written about. In reading these scriptures, you are learning how these people were in covenant with the Most High and how He led them. So it is important to read the scriptures from the right perspective, because I promise you, the problem that most people have today is that they read the scriptures from many different perspectives. Mostly today in America, it's an American perspective, but it's never from the perspective that the scriptures were written from. And of course, why would they when they barely read what is called the Old Testament? This is how you will learn about the Hebrews and their ways and their culture. So what I want to do is go through the Bible and go over the books. The Bible is so misunderstood because, like that wicked man said, people don't know what many of the scriptures say. Like, do you know that many people actually claim to understand what the scriptures say and are speaking about, but they have never read Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Ezekiel? And if they did read them, they actually didn't read the other first 5 books of the Torah to really understand what these people were speaking to. But these major prophets, who not only prophesy about Yahusha, but very much about what happens in these last days, people literally say that they understand what's in the Bible, but they don't actually read what's in it. People feel that they don't need to read those books because they feel like everything from the Old Testament has already been fulfilled because of Yahusha. But the hypocrisy is that if you actually read these books, you would know just how ridiculous that actual claim is. So we need to talk about what's in the Bible. I'm going to discuss what's in the Bible by discussing these books of the Bible with sincere hope that it encourages and excites you and others to read these books on your own. So let's talk about these books. The Book of Genesis. I don't think that this is a problem book for most. This is a highly used book, and most people know what is in here. It's the beginning. It gives an account of creation and then the history of men. All of this history is important, and if you use it as a foundation, it can help make better sense of the world that we live in. Not dividing it by skin color or these nations of our modern time, but by the tribes of men that are scattered in the world that all stem from the 3 sons of Noah. There is so much vital information in the book of Genesis. We understand the history of men until we get to the point when Yahuwah begins making covenants with men. The first major covenant starts with Abraham, and then we watch how this covenant gets passed down to his son Isaac, then to Isaac's son Jacob, which then gets passed down to all of Jacob's sons. These are the Hebrews. The book of Genesis begins the history of them. It is the first book of the 5 books of Moses. It is the foundational understanding that the Hebrews had since the beginning. The Hebrews read the Torah, and this was the first book of it. You cannot understand the scriptures without reading this book. So of course, we start with it. There are 50 chapters in this book. So if you read at least 2 chapters per day, you can get through this book in less than a month. If you increase it to 5 chapters per day, you can get through it in 10 days. I think you get the point. After understanding how Yah created the heavens and the earth, the main story of Genesis starts in Genesis chapter 12, where we see Yahuwah's plan to bless all the nations of the earth through Abraham's descendants. Verses 2 and 3 of chapter 12, Yahuwah says, "I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Everything that you read in this book is foundational, and it's essential to understand if you're going to understand the rest of the scriptures that follow after. From this point on, you are reading the account of people Yahuwah, our Creator, chose to bless the world through. And so as you read on from chapter 12 to the end of chapter 50, this is the history of how this nation was built. In the end, it ends with Jacob's sons residing in Egypt to escape a famine. This book is the foundation of everything. You cannot start history without understanding this book first. You cannot start talking about anything in this world without grasping what is in this book of Genesis. Without this understanding, your understanding of the world is wrong. Everything that we deal with today is based on a changing of what we found in this book, from understanding racial topics, to understanding the shape of the earth, to understanding how old the earth is and dinosaurs. There's so much different things that go on in this modern day world that wants to contradict this book. You have to read this book and make this your foundation if you're going to understand the scriptures. Start in the book of Genesis and read it diligently. If you start this book and decide that you're going to learn from it, how you attack reading this book will determine how you move on to the other books. Let's move on. The book of Exodus. The next book, which is highly important, is the book of Exodus. This is the second book of the Torah. This is where Yahuwah establishes himself with his chosen people and shows himself and his power to the world. This book must not be glossed over, but read with intent to understand, because this is the beginning of understanding the culture and the ways of the Hebrews. We are introduced to Moses in this book, and we see the power of Yahuwah shown to the world. The first section is in chapters 1 through 18. This section shows Yahuwah as the savior and provider for his people. The second section is highly important to our faith, and it must be read. Chapters 19 through 40 go over Yah's law and his way. He gives Yasharel, which you might say Israel. He gives Yasharel detailed laws and instructions. These laws reveal Yah's character and is exactly how Yasharel was called out from the rest of the world. This is their way and their culture. This was the whole setup of how the people of Yah were told to live. You cannot gloss over this. It is a whole culture, and if you want to understand the Bible, you must understand how these people lived. Exodus chapter 20 is extremely important, as it is the 10 commandments that Yahuwah gave Yasharel to abide by that showed how to live and be an example to the world. At the end of this book of Exodus, he gives instructions about the tabernacle, the construction, furnishing, and the services. As you read, you may understand that many of these instructions point to Yahusha. Like a major example is with Passover. But listen, as you read, you may understand it, or you may get a little overwhelmed by the complexity of their instructions. The point is to read it and learn about the culture of the Hebrews. It may take multiple readings of those last chapters to really understand their ways. Don't be frustrated or lose interest if you get overwhelmed. Continue to read and pray about what you're reading. You will not learn everything all at once just because you started reading. Don't think that you're going to become an expert overnight because you started reading the Bible. The important thing is to read it and not skip over it or ignore it. Just because you believe we have Yahusha, these things don't matter. That is the wrong way of thinking. Much of how Yah instructed Yasharel was a foreshadowing of Yahusha. But don't go in reading trying to make all those connections all at once. You are just starting to read. So at this point, when you're in the book of Exodus, listen, you have not gotten to Messiah yet. You are understanding the set-apart way that our Creator desires us to live. At the close of Exodus, and this book is only 40 chapters, so this is another book that with a chapter a day, sometimes two, it could easily be read in 1 month at bare minimum. But by the end, we see that Yah saved his chosen people. He gave them the instructions to live according to his standards and to be set apart from the ways of the world, to be holy and righteous in his eyes. And Yasharel agreed. The scripture says, so Moses came and told the people all the words of Yahuwah and all the judgments. And all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which Yahuwah has said, we will do. And Moses wrote all the words of Yahuwah. And he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Yasharel. That's Exodus chapter 24, verses 3 and 4. And so after they agreed to his commands, the Israelites then completed the construction of the tabernacle. It says, thus all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting was finished, and the children of Yasharel did according to all that Yahuwah had commanded Moses. So they did. That's Exodus chapter 39, verse 32. And then after the tabernacle was built, then the glory of Yahuwah came to fill it. Then the cloud covered the tabernacle of meeting, and the glory of Yahuwah filled the tabernacle. Exodus chapter 40, verse 34. And from this moment at the end of the second book of the Bible, Yahuwah was now with his people. Yahuwah saved his people, provided for them, made a covenant with them, and then taught them how he wanted them to live. And then he lived with them. And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them. That's Exodus chapter 25, verse 8. And all of this is foundational if you're going to understand the scriptures. That's the book of Exodus. Let's continue. The book of Leviticus. Now, in reading the Bible, this book right here is normally where things start getting a little challenging for the readers. Well, to be honest, it probably starts in Exodus around chapter 25 or so, when it starts speaking of the tabernacle. People start reading that and they get a little confused. Then the devil starts suggesting to them that they don't really need to know this because Jesus nailed all this to the cross. So they skip over this crucial book. But this third book of the Torah cannot be ignored. This is the culture and the way of the chosen people of Yahuwah. Regardless of what side you're on in the debate about following the law or not, we cannot profess a love for Yah and ignore the standard that he set for his children. Have you ever set up rules for your children that were pretty general because you are preparing their hearts to understand things better when they mature? Like setting rules in place for them so they know not to go too far and they know their boundaries and their limits. Now, as they get older, and you give them a little more room to grow, your expectations of the standard you have set never goes away. But you hope your children grow into understanding why you've made the standards. This is Yahuwah, and the thing is that so many people today do not understand him because by the time they get to this third book, they have already decided that they don't need to read this because it does not apply to them, or it's too confusing, so they run from it. And this is where the separation happens with the people who say they love Yah, but they don't truly know him. You cannot skip this book. Yahuwah's concern for his people and his desire for fellowship with them becomes more and more clear to anyone who reads carefully through the book of Leviticus. Every detailed regulation recorded in Leviticus is a revelation from Yahuwah through Moses for his people. What you will find in this book of Leviticus is how Yahuwah personally instructed the Israelites to live for him. This is exactly a book where you start understanding the Bible from a Hebrew mindset because no other people were commanded like this. And so after you understand how Yasharel was conditioned and what the culture was, you now have a strong understanding of what would be acceptable to them and what would not be. You get a clear picture of what the standard for Yasharel was. And this is a major foundation in understanding the Bible. This is the time when Yahuwah gave his standard and his ways. This is a foundational understanding of who the Israelites were and how they lived. Imagine us saying that we love Yah and desire to do his will, but we don't take the time to review the standards he put in place. The purpose of Leviticus was to show the Israelites how they could live in ritual and moral purity. When they maintained their purity, Yahuwah could live among them, and they could approach him in worship. When you read, you'll see that many of the required sacrifices described were for the atonement of sins. And hallelujah, if you know our Messiah, we know that he now is our atonement. So we no longer need to do those sin offerings or those burnt offerings. But if you are going to understand the history of Yasharel, you must understand how they lived and what they were required to do in order to be Yah's chosen, set-apart people. It's important to understand that the instructions in Leviticus were not given to Yasharel in order to help them achieve their own salvation. Salvation can never be earned. It is a gift of Yahuwah's grace. These instructions were given to the set-apart nation so that this people would know how to maintain their fellowship with Yahuwah. Then Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, each took his censer and put fire in it, put incense on it, and offered profane fire before Yahuwah, which he had not commanded them. So fire went out from Yahuwah and devoured them, and they died before Yahuwah. And Moses said to Aaron, "This is what Yahuwah spoke, saying, by those who come near me, I must be regarded as holy, and before all the people, I must be glorified." So Aaron held his peace. That's Leviticus chapter 10, verses 1 through 3. You see, for some reason, we treat him so differently. Like we can live and do however we want, but because he provides grace, we feel like no matter what, he will accept us. Instead of us who love him, living to please him and living according to his standards. We must regard him as holy. We must regard him as set apart. And when you read these laws, you understand why Yasharel was so different than all the other nations. You also realize why there is such a lack of regard to him today. Because the simple fact is that people choose not to know of him the way he is biblically, but from a point of view of how they would like to view the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's exactly why that man was able to say those exact words about not knowing the scriptures. In this book, there is much all believers can learn from and grow tremendously from. It is 27 chapters, so easily it can be read in a month. And learning from it, there are many different themes. Do not expect to be an expert on Levitical law by the first reading. You may not even really understand everything that you're reading the first time, but you can definitely gain understanding on Yah's standard for his children. You can learn Yah's distinction between clean and unclean. The distinction between clean and unclean and various laws for holy living promoted the Israelites' own welfare and made them a strong, healthy people, and marked them out as a people separated to their God versus the other nations that were around them that did not live according to the standards like Yah's. People often ask about if it's lawful for them to eat clean or unclean animals. But when you're asking that question, you're looking at it wrong. Yahuwah's way is the standard of life. He is our creator. He created our animals. If he says something is unclean, there is a reason. And if we follow and obey him, you start to really see real fruit in your life. Taking the pork and the shellfish out of our lives can bring extreme health benefits. Why wouldn't we abide by our Creator's guidance for life? He says, "For I am Yahuwah, your Elohim. You shall therefore consecrate yourselves, and you shall be holy, for I am holy. For I am Yahuwah, who brings you up out of the land of Egypt to be your Elohim. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy." That's Leviticus chapter 11, verses 44 and 45. You must beware of those who speak against your desire to be holy and set apart because they do not desire the same. People want to tell you that you're doing too much because you're following these laws, when you're actually following our Creator because He's holy and you want to be. This is not about doing things to earn your salvation. It's about doing things to live a better life, a clean life. A majority of people's biggest issues in this life is about their health. But people would rather follow the ways of this world and inject themselves with unknown drugs all day long, but they won't take our Father's advice on the foods to eat. You have to think about whose way you're following. Let me not get off subject though. All believers can learn much from Leviticus. The holiness of Yahuwah, the necessity of holy living, the great cost of atonement and forgiveness, the privilege and responsibility of presenting only our best to Yah, the generosity of Yahuwah that enables his people to be generous. These are just some of the lessons that you find in this book. The book of Leviticus reveals the holiness of Yahuwah and his love for his people. The book of Leviticus calls Yahuwah's people of all ages to pattern their life after Yah's holy purpose, and it must be read. If you have disagreed with many of my videos and my take on many topics, it's often because books like this and the next two that I'm going to speak about are avoided in your application of your faith. Grow your understanding of Yahuwah's standard by reading this book. Let's talk about the next one. The book of Numbers. Okay, so when reading the scriptures, this book normally is what comes next for most after Exodus, when it is decided to skip Leviticus. This fourth book of the Torah is an important book of history. It goes into more history after Yasharel was freed from Egypt and now is on their way to the Promised Land. This book describes events right before the Israelites entered the Promised Land. This book deals with a lot because now we are seeing that right after Yahuwah freed his children and gave them his laws and his statutes, because things weren't happening on their timeline and according to the way they felt things should be going, the Israelites became restless and impatient. They made grave mistakes and Yahuwah disciplined them. We learn that Yahuwah loves his children, but he will scold and chastise them. It is clearly shown that we should not take him for granted, and these lessons were crucial for Yasharel to learn. And they are just as important for us who want to understand Yah. In this book, Yahuwah does discipline his children, and as you read, you will understand why. Through his instruction, Yahuwah trained Yasharel not only to worship him, but to trust in him for the ultimate victory. And those that chose not to were chastised. So let's deal with some things. When reading this book, you're going to find chapters where we go through the many names of the descendants of Yasharel. I mean, that's how this book starts off. It starts with a census, and it can discourage many people when reading. This census is important, but listen, it's normal to get discouraged or bored when reading all these names, especially if you don't know what you're to do with them at this time. If you need to, skim through those parts, but don't skip the full chapters because you could miss important information. Like for instance, as you go through chapter 1, it goes through the numbering of each tribe. But if you just skip that whole chapter, you miss at the end the important part that you need to know. But the Levites were not numbered among them by their father's tribe. For Yahuwah had spoken to Moses, saying, "Only the tribe of Levi you shall not number, nor take a census of them among the children of Yasharel. But you shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, over all its furnishings, and over all things that belong to it. They shall carry the tabernacle and all its furnishings. They shall attend to it and camp around the tabernacle. Numbers chapter 1, verses 47 through 50. If you just skipped over chapter 1, you wouldn't understand how Yah decided to keep the Levites. This is very important information if you want to understand the structure of Yasharel and how things worked. So do not skip the chapters, but also do not let yourself get bored or discouraged by the census or the genealogies if you don't know what you're to do with that information yet. When you actually understand the Bible from the Hebrew perspective, you also view the numbering of Israelites from their perspective. The list were the final roll call before the battle. They prompted praise to Yahuwah for his faithfulness to the Israelites. He had protected them and multiplied their numbers even in the middle of the wilderness. The book of Numbers is broken up into two basic sections. Each of them begins with a census. The first census, found in chapters 1 through 4, numbered the men of war of the first generation of those who had left Egypt. The first generation did not trust Yah and did not thank him for his provision. They doubted him, accused him, and rebelled against his instruction. Because of that, they were disciplined, and this generation did not inherit the land promised because they had been faithless. And throughout the rest of the book, we saw that Yah did not abandon his people, but he allowed the rebellious to live out their lives while he continued to instruct them in his ways and how they could prepare their sons and daughters to enter the land. And Yahuwah spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "How long shall I bear with this evil congregation who complain against me? I have heard the complaints which the children of Yasharel make against me. Say to them, as I live, says Yahuwah, just as you have spoken in my hearing, so I will do to you. The carcasses of you who have complained against me shall fall in this wilderness. All of you who were numbered according to your entire number from 20 years old and above, except for Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Yahusha the son of Nun. You shall by no means enter the land which I swore I will make you dwell in. But your little ones, whom you said would be victims, I will bring in, and they shall know the land which you have despised. But as for you, your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, and your sons shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years, and bear the brunt of your infidelity until your carcasses are consumed in the wilderness. According to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, for each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year, namely 40 years. You shall know my rejection. I, Yahuwah, have spoken this. I will surely do so to all this evil congregation who are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall be consumed, and there they shall die." That's Numbers chapter 14, verses 26 through 35. And that's dealing with the first section of Numbers. The second section happens after the 40 years of wandering the wilderness, and the second census is done. That census is done in chapter 26. The second generation was prepared to do what their parents had failed to do, and Yah prepares them for their inheritance and divides the land. Now Yahuwah spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan, across from Jericho, saying, "Speak to the children of Yasharel and say to them, when you have crossed the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you. Destroy all their engraved stones, destroy all their molded images, and demolish all their high places. You shall dispossess the inhabitants of the land and dwell in it. For I have given you the land to possess. And you shall divide the land by lots as an inheritance among your families. To the larger you shall give a larger inheritance, and to the smaller you shall give a smaller inheritance. There everyone's inheritance shall be whatever falls to him by lot. You shall inherit according to the tribes of your fathers. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall be that those whom you let remain shall be irritants in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall harass you in the land where you dwell. Moreover, it shall be that I will do to you as I thought to do to them." That's Numbers chapter 33, verses 50 through 56. You see, this book of Numbers is crucial in gaining understanding of the scriptures and how Yahuwah works. In chapter 25, we are introduced to a significant moment in the history of Yasharel. That is the idolatry at Baal Peor. It was here that Yasharel first experienced an attraction of Baal worship, and it was this problem that plagued its existence for centuries. It is important to note this because this is where we begin to see the difference between who Yasharel is versus the other pagan nations. There are 36 chapters, and this book easily can be read at minimum within a month's time. This is a foundational understanding for those who desire to understand Yahuwah and the relationship he had with his children. Read this book. We'll go to the last book of the Torah, the book of Deuteronomy. Throughout the first 4 books of the Torah, we are introduced to Yahuwah and his children. We are introduced to Yah's set-apart ways. We are shown the history from the time Yahuwah made his covenant with Abraham to how the covenant passed down through Yasharel, until he freed them from Egypt and guided them towards their inheritance. In those 4 books, it is a remarkable account, and as we read through it all, we gain a good understanding of who Yahuwah is and how he desired those who love him to be. The last book of the Torah is an important book that is not read in the manner that it should be. People jump around and pick verses that may suit them, or they just ignore this book entirely because the standard Yahuwah raises here, people do not want to live by it. So when you discuss the differences between Yasharel and the other pagan nations, like when you try to have the discussion about not celebrating pagan holidays, people do not understand because they have not read through this book to clearly understand how Yahuwah has set Yasharel apart. In this book, 34 chapters, which, like the other books, easily could be finished within a month at most, Yasharel is about to enter into Canaan, their promised land. But before they enter in, Moses seized one last opportunity to prepare the people for their new life in the land of their inheritance. Since Moses himself was not entering the land, he wanted to make sure that the nation did not forget its covenant with Yahuwah. And so when you read this chapter, you will see Moses carefully review the laws of Yahuwah so that Yah's way is known. So like I explained, in reference to what happened in Numbers at Baal Peor, the people whom Moses is addressing in this book of Deuteronomy were those who had survived the plague that Yahuwah brought in punishment for the sins of the people. When you read the book of Numbers, you'll read about this. Your eyes have seen what Yahuwah did at Baal Peor. For Yahuwah, your Elohim, has destroyed from among you all the men who follow Baal of Peor. That's Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 3. Moses pleaded with this new generation to be faithful to Yah's laws. As you read, you will see that he frequently used the word today. For example, and Moses called all Yasharel and said to them, "Hear, O Yasharel, the statutes and judgments which I speak in your hearing today, that you may learn them and be careful to observe them." That's Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 1. You see him use this word today to emphasize that this new generation could start anew, and they did not need to focus on their rebellious past. In this book, there is also crucial understanding of the benefits or the consequences of following Yahuwah's laws and statutes. Because this chapter is so often ignored, this crucial piece of information is often missing when people try to understand the history of the Israelites and what happened to them. I mean, have you honestly ever heard a sermon from Billy Graham or T.D. Jakes or Joel Osteen? Have you ever heard these men ever give a sermon about the curses that the Israelites are under because of their disobedience? In this book, it was told to Yasharel the rich blessings that will come to those who obeyed Yahuwah's law, but also the curses that those who rejected Yahuwah's law would receive. This was extremely serious, and it is foundational in understanding the scriptures. But in Christianity, like I explained, these verses are all but ignored. This book, the last book of Moses, was given as Yahuwah commanded Moses to leave the words of the law as a testimony to Yasharel. In response to this call, Moses wrote the words down, gave them to the priest for safekeeping, and commanded the priest to read the word of Yahuwah every 7 years. So Moses wrote this law and delivered it to the priest, the sons of Levi, who bore the ark of the covenant of Yahuwah, and to all the elders of Yasharel. And Moses commanded them, saying, "At the end of every 7 years, at the appointed time in the year of release, at the Feast of Tabernacles, when all Yasharel comes to appear before Yahuwah, your Elohim, in the place which he chooses, you shall read this law before all Yasharel in their hearing. Gather the people together, men and women and little ones, and the stranger who is within your gates, that they may hear and that they may learn to fear Yahuwah your Elohim and carefully observe all the words of this law, and that their children who have not known it may hear and learn to fear Yahuwah your Elohim as long as you live in the land which you crossed the Jordan to possess. That's Deuteronomy chapter 31, verses 9 through 13. Moses not only prepared the new generation for the coming conquest of the land, but ensured that every generation after would hear Yahuwah's laws. This book is Moses' emphasis on the covenant. And if we intend to understand Yahuwah, we cannot skip this book. I mean, the nerve of us to think that we could. If you ever thought this, repent from that thought. This book was required to be read by the whole assembly of Yasharel every 7 years so that all of Yasharel understood the covenant with Yahuwah. This was the basis of the culture of Yasharel. To think of our arrogance to believe that we know and understand Yahuwah while we ignore this foundational book is arrogance to the T. It is us ignoring the scriptures and leaning on our own understanding. And this is exactly why there is such a strong disconnect between those who say they love Yah and those who say they love Yah and actually read his word. The scriptures are it. This is the book. This is the resource, and the devil has done everything in his power to deter us from reading and believing in it. This book is remarkably awesome, and I believe that if people just understood what was in it, they would be motivated to read it, which is why I am starting this series. We must read the scriptures, and I want to make sure that in this day and age, people can feel excited about this and not look at this as a chore or a duty. I mean, isn't his word exciting you? For me, just speaking about this makes me want to go back and read again. There is always something to learn, so no one should ever say, I read this before, I don't need to do this again. This is how we gain power in this world. First we read it, then we apply it. These first 5 books of the Bible are crucial. But like I said, most people start their understanding from the Gospels and then turn back to understand the foundation. I am guilty myself from earlier on teaching this because I always thought knowing Messiah was important first. But I realized that even though people knew of Messiah, because they didn't understand Yasharel and who it was that Messiah came to, they aren't truly understanding Messiah. And that's why the world lives in lawlessness. And I apologize sincerely if I earlier on held you back on your learning. But listen, you need to read the scriptures and abide by them. When we understand the foundation of Yasharel, the fight for lawlessness cannot be justified. There can be no way that after you understand the foundation set from these scriptures, that you now feel that all of a sudden, later on, these people would live any way that they desired. The new covenant promised to write his law on our hearts. But if we live according to the ways of this world, we are blocking or quenching his spirit, which then clearly is not allowing him to write on us freely. I think I may break down each book into a separate video and put it on my social media and website. I desire that in these last days, there is a sincere desire from all who love Yah to read and feed off Yah's word. And I think that Yah has led me to do this here to help you with this. Show this to your children and get an excitement of the word with them. As you read his word and grow in knowledge of him, you begin to draw closer to him, feeling more connected to him, then allowing him to counsel you more because you are more understanding of him, his desires for us, and what he considers to be holy and righteous. So I encourage you to make sure, starting right now, you start reading and grow in your knowledge of Yah. And make sure you are not following men like that example I showed you earlier. Those men who call themselves preachers, pastors, and teachers, but don't even know what's in the Bible, are in the abundance. And if you want to prepare yourself for Yahuwah, be rid of that wicked type of influence and learn about the scriptures yourself by reading them. This is the day Yahuwah has made, and we all as a family of believers all around the world who desire to be holy because Yahuwah is holy, we will focus on the reading and studying of his word, and we will apply it in our lives. We will read and study to show ourselves approved. Nothing else is more important than this. So if you never knew where to start or how to start, now you know. There are no more excuses. This is about you now. It's about, will you seek him out or will you keep putting him off until your time is up? Make the right decision today and read your Bible like your life depends on it. Because it does. Remember that. Be blessed. Hallelujah. Praise Yah. Okay, thanks again for watching. If this has blessed you, please make sure to like it and share it with others. This is a very important video. Please share this to all people who aren't reading their Bibles. If you haven't done so already, please make sure you subscribe to this channel. Yah willing, I upload every Friday. Please don't forget to follow this ministry on Facebook and Instagram, as well as on my website, truthunedited.com. Listen, I would really like to give a special thank you and shout out to those who have donated and continue to support this ministry. I'm so thankful for the love of our Father, and I thank you for your obedience to his call on your heart. I'm always humbled by your support, and I'm very thankful for you. You know who you are. I sincerely thank you. You have no idea how much your support to this ministry means. Okay, thanks again everyone for watching. I love you all.